Welcome to Old Fashioned on Purpose, the show where we explore what we have left behind as we have raced towards progress as a culture, and also how we can get back the good stuff. So I'm your host, Jill Winger. My family and I have been homesteading out here on the wide open Wyoming prairie for over a decade now, and I love to teach people old-fashioned skills that just make life better. So today's episode is one I have been promising for a very long time, and we finally are sitting down to make it happen. And by we, I mean Christian and I. He is back.
Hello.
I think they liked your previous episodes where you were here with me. So
Hopefully.
It'll be good. Have you back. So the topic today is kind of a bit of a personal storytelling of this crazy endeavor we have participated in for the last year and a half, and that is starting a charter school in our tiny little town of 175 people. And, you know, in and of itself, that is a big project, but it's kind of a weird project for people like us. We are a homeschool family. We're entrepreneurs. And it just, people are like, what? You did what? Why are you engaged in this project? And so there's a lot of pieces. It's kind of a heck of a story. I've said several times it should be like a Hallmark movie at some point, because there were good guys and bad guys and drama and valleys and mountains. And so I still can't really believe it happened the way it did, but it did. So we're going to do our best to give you some of the juicy bits today behind the scenes, a little bit of a tell-all. Yeah, it should be good.
Should be good. Welcome to the ride.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. A
major journey for us.
Yes. We learned a lot, and it almost killed us, but I'm glad we did it.
And it's not over yet.
It's not over yet. No, it's not.
It's been fun. So,
okay.
Where do you want to start?
Yeah. So, I guess let's just give a little overview just in case people are totally unaware that we did this thing. So it started back in 2020. I don't remember. What, two?
Yeah, 22.
It's like a time warp. We were happily homeschooling our children, but getting more involved in our local community. It's the same community where the soda fountain is. And I don't know, for some reason, I heard this trouble brewing around the school in town. It's always been a small school. They've been threatening to close it for like 20 years.
Like 40 years.
40 years. And I heard that there was something going on with the ag teacher, that the district that controlled the school was like threatening to take away the school's ag teacher, which is a big deal for a rural ranching school. And a whole bunch of parents were upset, and they're like, can you guys come to the school board meeting just to be there in support of keeping our ag teacher? And I'm like, sure, you know, I care about the community. I care about ag. I know we need an ag teacher there. So I went. I think you were gone.
I didn't go to that one.
I'd never been to a school board meeting in my life. And I went, and I was so angry by the time I left at how the district was operating. And there was just an incredible lack of integrity, just dishonesty. It was just slimy. Like, it made me feel dirty how they operated and how they were manipulating the situation. And we had friends who were involved in the school at that time, and they were trying to be diplomatic and trying to come up with solutions and compromise. And the district was basically like, no, screw you guys. We don't care. And so even though we were homeschooling completely at that time, I walked out, I'm like, this is wrong. And I cannot stand by and watch this happen. Like, it just ignited a sense of justice in me. And so at that point, I came home and talked to Christian. I'm like, I don't know what we need to do, but we need to be more involved in this, even if we never send our kids to that school. And so we just kind of sat on that for a little while.
Yeah, it was a couple of months probably, at least, before we started doing anything else.
Yeah. I also think it's important to note that we didn't really ramrod this idea. We were just kind of sitting back and feeling like we wanted to help, but we didn't know how. And it came into our awareness that the district was now seriously talking about closing the school. Like, it went from like always threatening it to like, we could see them starting to take action.
Yeah, and it was veiled. It wasn't public. It wasn't, they weren't actively saying in the public that they were going to close the school, but the school was in trouble financially. So, the amount of money that the school gets is really based on how many kids go to that school. And because this was a small town and there wasn't very many kids going there, it costs a lot more money to run that school than the school district was actually bringing in. And so, there was a lot of trouble brewing there, and had been for a long time. That's why any small town, and if you're from a small town or know of small towns, I'm sure, there's lots of discussion about schools closing in small towns and how detrimental that can be to the town, economically, and just, as far as people wanting to live there. And so that was really our main goal, is how do we protect the school? How do we protect the town?
Yeah. And that's the thing, even though, and a lot of people look at us and they're like, well, you're hypocrites. You didn't send your kids to the school, but you don't want it to close. And I'm like, at the time with how the school was being run, we felt like our kids, how do I say this delicately? Our kids were just better off at home. There was some things happening there that, as much as I wanted to stay open, I didn't really want my kids to necessarily be there. But yeah, I still didn't want it to close because it would kill our town. Like a school like that closing would absolutely dry up the town. And our town has started to experience some positive growth. And I'm like, oh man, this is going to be the worst thing, is we're going to go completely backwards. And so we were sitting with that tension. And then I think it was June of 2020.
Yeah, something like that. I'm not sure.
Our good friends called us up one day. I'll still remember I was like out walking in the barn when she called me, and she's like, what would you think if we started a charter school? And that was the first time I'd ever even heard the phrase charter school spoken in this context. And I'm like, we're up for big, crazy projects. So I'm like, yeah, sweet. What's a charter school? Like, what does that mean? And so her name is Dana, and our other friend is named Jara. And so I don't know if they know we're going to talk about them publicly, but hey guys. So they were like, they're just two stay-at-home moms, really just minding their own business up to this point, but just felt that call that they needed to take action, which I respect so much. And so they really ramrodded this. They started just like, none of us knew what we were doing, you guys. Like, I feel like there's such a perception that you have to be so prepared in order to do something big. And I feel like that's so wrong most of the time. You just have to start imperfectly. And that's what our friends did, is they started going to charter school meetings. They, not in our town, but like in Colorado and in other places. And they started to talk to people who had started charter schools in other locations and started making a ton of phone calls. And so they did all of that work. And then they were just like, hey, are you guys supportive? Are you willing to help us out? And we're like, yeah, we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, what does that look like?
What does that look like? But yeah, we're on board. We're going to cheer you on. We're going to be here. And so they did a ton of the footwork. And what they discovered, and I might be saying this wrong, because when it gets into the government part, my brain just like kind of shuts off. But it was this magical window in this exact time period of 2022 when Wyoming had this piece of legislation that would allow for the creation of 3 more charter schools. And normally that's not easily available, right?
Yeah. So to differentiate, first of all, is traditionally charter schools are authorized by the school district. So whatever district you're in, that school district has the opportunity or has the option to authorize a charter within their territory, essentially. But in different states, and I think in Wyoming at that particular time, there was 5 charter schools in Wyoming, and that's how they had been established. They were authorized by the district for which they were in. But typically, districts don't like charter schools because they're competition. So they're going to take kids out of the school, and that money is going to follow the kid. So that ultimately takes money out of the district. And so there's lots and lots of feelings, and I mean, it gets very, very heavily political real quick there. But what Wyoming did is they passed a legislation that allowed the state to authorize 3 charter schools,
which was rare.
Which is rare. And I mean, it's rare for Wyoming. It's done in other states. It had never been done in Wyoming before. And so that kind of opened this window for, hey, there's an opportunity for 3 charter schools. It didn't matter where in Wyoming. You had to apply through the state, what was called the State Loan and Investment Board, which is the board is comprised of the 5 highest elected officials in Wyoming. And so we had to apply to them, and then they ultimately could decide which charter schools they would approve. So when we went this route, initially when they decided, when Dana and Jared were like, hey, let's start a charter school, we started having meetings with our district saying, hey, could we start a charter school in our county? And we went to them with a proposal and said, here's what it would look like, and we think we can help you out financially. We understand you're operating at about $500,000 deficit right now. We think we can help offset that. That makes the district look better. And, essentially we're going to be taking on that burden ourselves. We're going to say, hey, we'll be the ones that have to figure out how to run a charter school here. And ultimately they denied us. They said, no, we don't think we can do that. And we recommend that you go the state route. Now, my feelings personally is that at that particular time, the superintendent that was in place during that administration, I'm pretty certain the reason he sent us to the state was because he thought we would fail. He's probably looking at us like a bunch of backwoods, little kids running around in this little small town of, yeah, you're never going to get this done when you go apply at the state level. It's not going to happen, which is fair. He didn't know any better and we didn't know any better either. But ultimately, that's the direction that we went to the state. And we were the very first state authorized charter school in Wyoming, which was a big deal.
Right. I also realized I really love to be underestimated. You want to fire me up, just tell me you don't think we can do it. Because I'm like, okay, buddy, think we're going to fail? Watch us go. And that was pretty gratifying. Once that's like fast forwarding.
Which was awesome, but we had no clue what we were in for.
No clue what we were in for. We were like, this will be no big deal. I mean, we knew it was going to be a big deal, but we had no idea how big of a deal. So again, there was this window of time where 3 charter schools could be authorized. So we knew when Dana and Jared came to us, they're like, this is like this window, we've got to act now. The first step was the application.
Yeah.
And it was funny because at that point in time, the application felt like Mount Everest. And we were just like, man, if we can get this application done and we can get approved, it's going to be smooth sailing, which is really funny to look back now. But so our first phase was filling out, what was it like? How many?
It was over 300 pages.
300 pages that we were filling out. And then they were like, okay, you have to include all of your policies and procedures. So basically we created all the paperwork for a charter school from nothing.
Well, and it's essentially, the application that we turned into the state then becomes your charter agreement. So you're designing your school. Everything you put in that charter application then literally becomes a contract with the state. So, how we're going to educate, what our policies and procedures are going to look like, what our administration is going to look like, what our teachers, what the school structure, like all of that had to be defined in that application. And then, and we didn't necessarily know it at the time. We thought, oh, okay, cool. This is just going to be, here's what we're proposing to you. And then literally we find out later on that they're like, cool, now that you're approved, your application now becomes your contract. So everything you put in that contract, you get to do. Yeah. Which was great for us because, I mean, we didn't cut any corners necessarily doing it, but had we had the opportunity to do it again, we might have looked at it a little bit different. But
you had we were sitting in this office. If you're watching on YouTube, we're in the room. We set up these white plastic chairs and 4 or 5 of us would be out here for weeks at a time, late at night. We ate a lot of junk food, weeks and weeks just writing. And guys, we're a bunch of parents, who don't have experience in this world. And I think it's just such a testament that if you want something bad enough, you will figure out a way to do it, whether you have the training or not. So we Googled and we made phone calls and we talked to lawyers and we talked to everybody who would talk to us to get advice and counsel. And so we filled out the application, which sounds like it was super easy. It was not. Submitted it because it was June. I think the application was due in August, right?
Yeah.
Or July.
I think it was July because then our interview with the state was in September.
Yeah. So the funny part is when there had been conversations with other people who'd started charter schools, are usually those applications take a
typically
year.
2 years.
2 years to fill out the
A lot of charter schools will spend 2 years just working on their application before they ever submit their application, whether that's to the state or whether that's to a district, doesn't matter. It's typically a 2-year process. We did it in less than 6 months.
No, less than 6 weeks.
Well, yeah.
Less than from
it was fast.
June to July, we made it happen. So we submitted it, which was a huge sigh of relief. Also scary because we're hopefully what we submitted was good. We didn't have a lot to compare it to. And then September was when we had our interview with the state. Yeah.
With the SLIB board.
So you guys went to the Capitol.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so then we had to present to the state. Dana and Jared presented to the state, which is, like I said, it's the 5 highest elected officials in Wyoming. So the chair of the board is the governor. And then you have the state auditor and the state treasurer and the superintendent of public instruction. And I don't remember the 5th one, but like I say, you're literally presenting at the highest level of government in Wyoming. And so they were quite nervous. I mean, they killed it. They did an amazing job. And we had a huge PowerPoint and a 300 and some page application that they had to go through. And they asked a lot of really hard questions. And the thing that I would give you guys a reminder on is this had never been done in Wyoming. Not only had it not been done from our standpoint, nobody in Wyoming had ever filled out or created an application to apply for a state authorized charter school, but the State Loan and Investment Board had never interviewed anybody to be a state authorized charter school. And then in turn, the Wyoming Department of Education had never had been involved with or approved or had any policies and procedures on a state authorized charter school, which was, really more bumps in the road for us to experience later on. We thought, hey, the hard part about this is just going to be getting through the application, and then boom, like these people will have this all figured out. And it turns out none of this was figured out.
Yeah.
So we were kind of creating the wheel. I mean, we were plowing a path from the day that we decided to do this application to even today. I mean, I'm now the CEO of the school, right? And there's still problems, maybe not problems, but there's still things in the school that we're trying to establish, like transportation and some things like that they've never been done in a state authorized charter school format before. So not only is it a challenge for us to go, how do we create this, but at basically every level of the government within the Wyoming Department of Education and everything, it's go, how do they do this? They haven't had to figure this out either.
And I think that's that whole process of expecting someone in authority somewhere to have the answers and then finding repeatedly that they didn't. It was interesting because like we prefer to be pioneers, right? That's why we homestead. That's why we've built the businesses we have. Like we don't like taking the beaten path, which is just funny. And over in our life, that's the same thing that keeps showing up.
Yeah.
Where I like it. Like we like being the new, we like being the early adopters, we like being the trailblazers, but also I think there's a reason that most people are adverse to that because like Christian said, we would get to a point in the process where we're like, okay, cool. Now we just need to call up Wyoming Department of Education, figure out what their policies are for this. It'll be bam, bam, bam. And we call them up and they're like, we don't have policies for that. We don't know. And we're literally talking to the top dogs in the state of Wyoming and they don't know because it's never been done, which on one hand is exciting and on one hand was super frustrating.
Yeah.
Because we were like, for the love, just give us an answer. We just need guidelines so we can start creating the next step. So I think that was one of the biggest frustrations over and over. And to this day, it's still
happening today. And in fact, when we were authorized in like September, October of 2022, they had then signed into law a brand new set of new legislation in 2023 that changed the bill. It essentially changed all of the rules that we had originally applied under. So the budget and everything that we had originally submitted to the state in 2022, which was when the original charter school bill had passed, they kind of went back to which they're going to continue to do every year from here on out. I could just feel it in my bones. I just know this is going to happen. But in 2023, they reworked that bill. And they made some changes. Some of it was good for us. Some of it was bad for us. But we had to completely readopt and rechange how we were going to do it. To the point where we were even having conversations with our attorney going, wait a minute, like we were approved and we were chartered under this original legislation. And now it's been jerked out from underneath us and completely changed. Like what rights do we have, if any? Our attorney's like, well, cool. If you want to sue the state of Wyoming, then yeah, you could certainly do that. And obviously that wasn't a route we were really wanting to go at that time. We were like, yeah, we still need to figure out how to make friends with these people. Yeah. So, if you're going to run a school in long term, you've got to be able to work and coordinate with all these people, not just, roll in there with guns blazing. But, it's a great point that the reality is a lot of times in life we think, hey, we just get over this one little hump and it's going to be clear sailing from there. And, this was just another example where, no one was coming to save us, so to speak. It was like, hey, we're gonna be down this trail, and we're still on this trail, and we're still blazing a path, which is ultimately why I was super excited. That's not my background. I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be the CEO of a charter school. I was like, I just like challenges. And if this had been a well-worn paved road, 4-lane highway of here's how you start charter school in the state of Wyoming, I probably wouldn't have been involved. Yeah. I don't know, either one of us would have been involved. It would have been like,
yeah, we'll let the experts take care of
the
that.
challenges wouldn't have been there. And now it's like, well, obviously this has never been done. So, we're kind of blazing this trail, so to speak. And once the trail becomes a 4-lane highway, then it'll be time for me to step out and find something else that excites
me. We are gluttons for punishment, as you guys know, if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time.
Which is an area, that I really would have to give Dana and Jara a plug. Not only did Dana and Jara, they felt this in their being of, hey, this is something we need to do, they responded to it.
Yeah.
There's so many times in life where we know, hey, here's an idea. Here's something we could do. Here's something we even should do, but yet we don't do it. And Dana and Jared took this thing by the horns and said, okay, we're going to do this. And they ran forward, scared as could be and not having a clear path. And, we'll tell some more stories here in a second, but it's just like, you have to step out in so much faith and that this is going to work. And you just don't know, obviously we don't get this crystal ball that says, yep, you do this, this, and this, then it's all going to be fine. And there were so many pieces of this puzzle that we just had to push forward and say, no, we're doing the best that we can do right now with the knowledge and the information that we have. We're making the most informed decisions that we can make. And we're just going to have to trust the process that somehow this is all going to connect and it's going to work in the future. And it did, miraculously. It literally, you could look back on all of those steps now when we were the most scared, when we're like, this is never going to work. This is going to fall apart. We're done. We're doomed. This thing is blown up. And yet something happened and it corrected the path.
Giving away the end. You can't
I'm not giving away.
Okay. So they went and presented to the governor and everybody. All these little people from Chugwater, you guys they all bought super nice clothes, and you got your first suit jacket and a tie.
No, I had my jacket, but it was my first tie.
Your first tie. Yeah. They cleaned up real nice, went to the Capitol, looked real important. Sometimes fake it till you make it is legit. That's actually a strategy. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So confidence goes a really long way. And so they presented, and we were all sitting here with knots in our stomach, waiting, and then the verdict came and they approved it. We got approved. Us and 2 other charter schools filled those 3 slots. And it was really cool because the other 2 charter schools were part of a bigger organization. So they had lots of financial backing, and they had their curriculum because it was a national deal. So it was kind of plug and play for them, no big deal. Yeah. And they kind of rolled in yeah, but this is easy. We got this covered. And we were little grassroots rolling in underdog. And I think we've dominated it, totally dominated it. And it was just cool. And the governor even said, he's this with our school, he's this is what we want to see. We want to see parents coming forward, and we want to see community taking action. So that was a pretty cool moment.
That was cool. He pulled us aside after we had been awarded the contract, and he's the other 2 charter schools, like Jill said, they came in with guns blazing. They had lots of money, lots of attorneys, lots of experience. They'd started a lot of charter schools all around the country, so they knew exactly how to do it. Where obviously we had no clue how to do it. But the governor is he's this is exactly what this legislation was meant to do. It was meant to see how charter schools can operate in these small rural towns. These other 2 charter schools, they got authorized in great big towns in Wyoming, where they're going to have lots of kids and lots of opportunities. Where our charter school was in one small town where it was going to take over the school in that town. And, the governor's just add some pressure on. He's well, by the way, there's a lot of eyes on you. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of people across the state of Wyoming that are going to look to see how well this charter school does. And if this charter school is successful in this small rural environment, then it's going to pave the way for the future on how a lot of these small towns handle their schools.
Yeah. Also, maybe we should, now that we're 20 minutes in, explain what charter school is. Because I did not know this. I had to Google it when this process started. A charter school is funded by it's funded publicly. It is not a private school. And we've had a ton of people come to us, especially in my audience. There's a lot of stigma around state funded schools, right? Public schools. And they're oh, don't do that. That's icky. Do private, do whatever. And I'm I think our lives would have been a lot easier, honestly, if we could have gone the private route, because we would have had a lot more freedom. We could not go that route because there is just not that sort of economic base in our tiny town. Right. There is not enough families who can pay to put their kids in a private school. It would not be sustainable. And so that's why we ended up going with a state funded. Do they have a little more control over what we do? Yes. But the cool thing about charter schools is that we also have a ton of freedom that a traditional public school doesn't have, in terms of how we're structuring things, what type of curriculum we're using. So I think it's kind of the best of both worlds. Also, I had no idea how freaking controversial charter schools are. Like, I had no idea. And like, you have to be careful what rooms you bring up the word charter school in, because some people will come after you with pitchforks. Like Christian said earlier, the public school system, and I know I have teachers listening to this. I absolutely believe there's a time and place for the public school system. So you guys know I'm not dogmatic on this, but the public school structure of our day and age does not like competition, and they do not like challenging the status quo. And so they see something like a charter school where I'm kind of like, hey, healthy competition is going to make you better. It's going to give people choices. They're like, no, people shouldn't have choices.
Right.
And so we ran into that opposition real fast.
A charter school is really considered to be a school of choice because it's still a publicly funded school. It's tuition free. We can't charge kids to come to this school. We can't discriminate against anybody. Anybody and anybody that comes to this school has to be accepted. So but the big difference is it's a school of choice, and we are a locally governed school. So where a typical school district has its publicly elected board of trustees that is governing that entire school. So you might have, if you're a big town, you might have 100 schools in that one district, and they're governing how that entire district is run. So if you want to change anything in that, it's very difficult because it's essentially got to go all the way to the top where that board of trustees exists, through 55 different layers of administration. And, you get the picture. Where with us, since we're an independent charter, we have to operate within the guidelines that we put in our charter. So, for example, we said that we were going to be a project-based and place-based school. We can't just change that model, because that's essentially in our contract. We told the government, we told the state, hey, here's how we're going to operate. This is what we're going to do. So we have to stay there. But we also have a board of trustees, but our board is appointed within the community. And so it's not a publicly elected board. So there is some, controversy over that. But at the end of the day, we still have to meet all the same state testing standards that the regular school does. We're a non-sectarian school. We can't, there's still some things that we can and can't do, but it just gives us the freedom to really pivot really fast. At the end of the day, I'm sure there's not anything necessarily that we can do that a traditional public school can't do. It's just that we can change, relatively quickly in how we're doing things. And it gives parents another option. It's because it's a publicly funded school. Parents don't have to pay to come here. They can say, hey, I want to go to a traditional school. That's cool. If you want to do that, great. If not, I want to put my kids in this other school because it's a project-based school, or it has more opportunities in ag or in rural environment or rural communities or whatever, then they have that right. They have that choice to do that.
Yeah.
So that's really what makes it a big deal for us.
Yeah. For sure. Okay. So we got approved, and then it was basically smooth sailing, happily ever after the end, right?
Yep.
It's
all done.
That was all done. No, we celebrated, and we took a deep breath, and then the real hard stuff started.
The real hard stuff happened basically within, I don't know, a couple of weeks, I suppose. Well, maybe a little bit longer than that. I think they awarded us in September. I think it was like September 14th or something like that, that we had our meeting with the SLIB board, and they awarded us. And then they said, okay, we're going to hand this over to the Wyoming Department of Education, and they will get you a contract within, I don't remember what the exact time frame, but it was like this short period, like we'll get you a contract within 2 weeks or something like that. It ended up being closer to like 2 months before we got our contract. And here again, I'm not necessarily picking on the Wyoming Department of Education. Some of it is that, sometimes when laws are passed, this is what's fascinating to me because I've never been super involved in the legislature or even watching laws get passed until this and watching how this process works. But it's like sometimes when laws get passed, especially when they're brand new, these lawmakers, these senators, these legislatures, they go in, they have lots of debate, they have lots of heated argument, they pass a law, the governor signs it, and then boom, they're done with it. And now, at least in our case, it was kind of like the Wyoming Department of Education, and even to a certain extent at that time, the SLIB board got left holding the bag because this had never been done before. So there was no policies, no procedures, no contracts, no nothing. It was like now all of a sudden everybody had to go back to, well, what does it say in this charter school bill? What does it say in this law? And how do we start rolling from here? So, while I kind of poked fun at, they were going to give us a contract in 2 weeks and it took them 2 months instead, they had to start from scratch too. They had to develop all of this. And this was where probably my biggest short-sightedness came into play, as I literally thought, I mean, I can remember having a conversation with our board. At that time, I was a board member on this, in this endeavor. And I remember telling him, I'm like, hey, we just get authorized and man, it's going to be smooth sailing from there. Not totally naive, but I'm like, now the SLIB board, we'll probably sit down with the SLIB board, or we'll sit down with the Wyoming Department of Education. We'll figure all this out. We'll figure out how we're going to do a building and blah, blah, blah. And our funding, there were still lots of questions about how our funding was going to work and what it's called an ADM, or the average daily membership, of how much you're going to get per student that you have in your school. We literally didn't end up finding out that number until like school had been open for about a week. We didn't really know, but I just thought, oh, this all work out. And then we were awarded, and then nothing happened. It's like SLIB said, here, cool. This is awesome. Here's a 5-year contract. By the way, you guys are good to go for 5 years. Now, here's what they did. This is the cliffhanger. They said, go back to the district and figure all of these pieces out. Because the SLIB board, again, it's the State Loan and Investment Board, State Land and Investment Board, whatever. It's not the State Loan, Investment, and Education Board. They exist for a very specific reason in Wyoming. Education wasn't one of them. So they almost themselves got left holding the bag of, cool, here this bill got passed. And oh, by the way, you guys now have the authority to authorize 3 charter schools. But they're like, we don't necessarily want to play in this either. We don't want to solve all these problems. We just awarded you a contract. Now you go figure it out. And we're kind of like, wait a minute. We came to you guys because the district didn't want to play with us. The district didn't want to authorize us. The district didn't want to give us anything. They didn't want to help us, blah, blah, blah. And now you want us to go back after you've authorized us? What incentive does the district have to play? The district's looking at us now going, well, that's cool. You guys got authorized, but we didn't authorize you. What would we want to do with you?
Especially several individuals in the district didn't think we were going to get it done.
Yeah, they didn't think we were going to get it done.
So when we got approved, they were very angry.
Yeah, there was major
not happy because they were mentally not prepared to have to deal with us. They kept thinking they put up as many roadblocks as we could. They kept thinking we were too dumb to figure out how to get over their roadblocks. Well, we proved them wrong. We got over all the roadblocks up to that point, and they were like, well, crap, now we have to figure out some more roadblocks, which they did. It gets better. Well, yeah. So we went back to the district to start the negotiations. Right?
And really the first thing we had to negotiate was, where could we have this school? We needed a building. You can't have a school if you don't have a school building. And there's 3 churches in this town in Chugwater that were like, well, worst case scenario, we can try to hold school in the basement of these 3 churches. And we had some contingency plans in place to try to make that happen. Worst case scenario, but that was not best case scenario. Here again, we got authorized as a K through 12 school. So to try to run K through 12 education in the basement of 3 churches was going to be pretty tough. So we started negotiating with the school, and it basically said, well, that's cool. But we're still going to have school next year. And we're like, well, but wait a minute. We have letters of intent from essentially every student and every family within the community that says they're going to come to our school.
Well, and let's back up a little bit. So there is an existing school building, right? An existing school in Chugwater that has been operating. That's the one they were threatening to close. And so the community, I mean, we just didn't go off on this half-cocked. The community has been looking for other options for a long time. But nobody could just take action to make it happen for a lot of reasons. And so the community was extremely supportive of the charter school. And I think that was one of the most humbling moments of this whole process, to see the people support us. In this day and age, it's really hard to get groups of people to come together for anything. But man, I still get chills when I think about it. The fundraisers we had, our community doesn't have a lot of money, and they gave so much money to help us. Yeah. And they, you had older people who haven't had kids in school for decades and decades, coming and showing up and offering to volunteer and giving us money and coming to our benefits. And it was so special and so humbling. So the community wanted this, and we had letters of intent that we collected a long time ago.
That was a part of our application process. Actually, we had to document to the state that the community wanted this school. And so, we'd spend a lot of time having community dinners and community meetings and open houses and talking about this whole process and collecting that data. So throughout that process, we had collected, I think it was 67 students essentially that had said, hey, it's not a contract. It was just a letter of intent saying, yeah, if the school is awarded, if the school starts, we'll send our kids there. And so, I think we had 26 kids in the district in that school in Chugwater the year before, the public school.
Yeah. Because parents were actively pulling their kids out because of the dissatisfaction of how the district was running the system. There were still good teachers there, but the teachers were frustrated. It was just a really sad situation. Like, there were good people in the school itself, but they were being hamstrung repeatedly by the powers that be. And so parents were pulling out. So every parent who was currently sending children to the old school, basically all but I think one, had said, no, we're all for the charter school. Like, we're going to send. So we went to the district and we're like, look, guys, basically, not to hurt your feelings, but we have all of the families that you currently have want to come to us. So you'll have like one student in your school next year. So what if we work together to come up with the best case scenario so we can pay you rent for your building so it doesn't sit, and we have a building and you have a solution and we're saving you money? And they said,
no, we don't believe you.
We don't want to play.
Well, essentially, they're like, we don't believe you.
Yeah.
They're like, we need to wait and see, come day one of school, how many of these kids actually show up to our district versus how many of these kids want to come to your school. And the reality is they knew. And here's the thing. At that particular time, when we were in this process, we had some very active opposition within the district. There were some board members, and the superintendent was very opposed to us existing. Fortunately for us, before the school actually opened, there had been an election, and several of those board members had been changed, and then they ultimately changed the superintendent as well. And with the new superintendent and with the new board, they kind of recognized, hey, at the end of the day, this actually is about the students. This isn't about money. This isn't about us versus them. This is all still in the same Platte County. It's all still in the same county. There's still Platte County kids, and so that was a big game changer for us. If we wouldn't be here today, in reality, if the new superintendent hadn't come on board and we hadn't gained the support of the new board members.
But that didn't happen till what is it? 0 hour. Like that, we were in this process. And here's, I think, one of the biggest lessons, which I see people get confused on. Like, when you're supposed to do something, and you know that because of your gut, you just feel it in your soul. And you guys have experienced that in various capacities, I'm sure, in your life. When you know you're supposed to do something, do not expect it to be easy. Like, why do you think that it's going to be sunshine and roses? Because I think that's a huge misconception. And so we went through this process. Like, we got approved in September of 2022. And when we were looking forward, we're going to start in August of 2023. So we're like, we have a year, we have these little problems, we're going to figure them out. And we kept thinking, okay, surely by the end of 2022, we're going to have our building figured out. No. Well, okay, by February, we'll have our building figured out. No. By May, we'll have it figured out. No. School's starting in August. It's June. It's July. We didn't know if we had a building to start the freaking school that we had students signed up for until July.
We actually had a temporary permit that started on the 1st of August.
On the 1st of August. So
school started, our teachers came back on August 9th, I think, and we got our temporary permit. It wasn't even a full permit. It was just a temporary permit that allowed us into that building for a month on the 1st of August. So, and so, we had 9 days there.
You want white knuckling.
But here's the thing. It gets worse than that, actually, because the reality is we had been, once we got our contract, even though we didn't have a building and we didn't know what our funding numbers were, we had a general idea. We didn't know what our funding numbers were. It was, honestly, they gave us I think it was like within $9,000. I think the low end was like, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. It was like the low end of $11,000 per ADM or per student. I think it was
like, they said you'll either get $9,000 a student or
up to like
$15,000 a student.
16, 15, 16, somewhere.
But we don't know.
But we don't know. So you had this gap. And I'm like, well, listen, my budget doesn't work on this bottom end. And my budget barely works on the top end of this number. Which is it going to be? And here again, as much as I would love to throw people under the bus, it kind of came back to the legislatures. It kind of came back to the Wyoming Department of Education. Hadn't ever had to figure out, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been in education before or have seen education funding models. It's like the world's most complicated formula you've ever seen in your life. Like, I'm sure we could put somebody on the face of the moon easier than we can figure out how much ADM is for a charter school in Wyoming.
Remind them what ADM is, just in case.
The average daily membership. So that's
how many students you have.
Each kid you have is considered an ADM. And so, we didn't know what that number was. But here's the thing that kept me awake. And just, fast forward a little bit, or maybe backtrack a little bit from the time we got authorized, I was ultimately forced to resign off of the board so that they could make me the CEO of the school, which was essentially the superintendent. In the charter school world, in a comparison, I was the superintendent in what would have been a regular school district. So I was the top dog. I'm the single employee of the board, of our board of directors. So they forced me off the board. Yeah, I like to say they forced me off the board. They forced me off the board. I wanted to quit anyway. And then they're like, oh, by the way, you can't quit. We're going to make you the CEO. And so,
we have to say, we all joke about quitting a lot. That's where that's not literally quitting. Every single one of the board and all of us at some point look at each other and go, can I quit? And we're like, nope. And they're like, okay. So that's an inside joke. Anyway, keep going.
So I found myself as the CEO, literally issuing teacher contracts. We had a proposed budget, and I had kind of a rough idea, but I was issuing teacher contracts because we had to have teacher contracts out by what was it?
It was June.
May or June or something like that.
And we had people moving here out of state to teach.
Yeah, we had people moving here. So again, I didn't have a building, and I didn't know what my funding numbers were. I did not have those two pieces of the puzzle locked in. And I'm issuing teacher contracts knowing that, come August, we're going to have to pay these teachers. Come August, I'm going to need a building. Come August, we're going to have, roughly 60 some kids show up. And I didn't have these pieces of the puzzle put into place. And we had a lot of people kind of corner us up and be like, how can you operate that way? How can you, on one hand, it almost looks like you're running recklessly, going, you're issuing teacher contracts. You don't know what your funding is. You don't even know that your budget works. You don't even know that you're going to have a building. How can you do that? How can you do that? In fact, one of the charter schools in Wyoming didn't start the same year that we did because they didn't have some of those pieces of the place. They didn't have their teachers hired, and they didn't have a building locked down.
They were waiting for all the stars to align. Not to dog on them.
No, and it wasn't their fault. I mean, they faced so much opposition in the town that they were in. It wasn't even funny. But the reality is here again, sometimes in life, you have to push forward. You have to go, I'm going to make this work. There's so many times we tell ourselves the stories of, I will wait until all the pieces line up and then I'll move. And in so many cases, and this one in particular, especially in just about everything that we've done in the past, it just never works that way. You have to move and then God will respond. You have to move and then the universe will show up in a way that you weren't expecting. But until you move, nothing's going to happen. It's like this waiting game. It's like playing a game of chicken almost.
It was, yeah.
You're going to take this risk. You're going to jump out. You're going to move in faith that this is going to happen. Because, I can't express it was like keeping me awake at night. I'd lay awake at 2:00 in the morning going, wait a minute, I've hired 9 teachers and I don't have a building.
We were all laying awake.
We were all laying awake. There was for sure. But at the same time, I wouldn't have gotten a building if I hadn't hired those 9 teachers. So let me paint this picture for you. When we were still having a standoff with the district, it's kind of this same thing. As the district is going, listen, if I don't give you the building, then guess what? You don't have a school. And the reality is most of those kids probably aren't going to show up in a church basement. Most of those parents would have been like, yeah, we really signed up for this big, grand vision of a project-based charter school. You're not going to be able to pull that off in a church basement. So we're not going to send our kid there. In fact, we'll just send them back to the district. So the district is going, if I don't give you this building, you don't start, and all those kids come back to me or back to the district. We don't care whether you got letters of intent or not. If you don't have a building, they're going to have to come back to us. And so there was this game of who moves first, where we simply, I literally told our board, I'm like, we have to step out. We have to say, okay, we're going to hire these teachers. We're going to issue these teacher contracts. Because if I don't have teachers, it won't matter if they give me a building. And if I had to wait literally until August 1st to issue those teacher contracts, teachers are done hired by then. Their teachers start looking for jobs in May. They want to know where they're going to go. They want to have these contracts signed and in place so that they know where they're going to be when the school starts. So there was just so many pieces of this puzzle that we had to step out in faith and say, okay, we're going to act. We're going to move. We can't see how this is going to work out. But, looking back on it now, you can obviously see how all those pieces of the puzzle fit together and how there was a higher power involved in making sure that this did happen. So it was,
So what's the difference? Because we've talked about this on our own, but I'd like to have the listeners consider this, because there was about 98 times in this process where most people would have gone, this is not meant to be. God doesn't want it to happen. The universe doesn't want it to happen, whatever. What made us not cave into that self-doubt of like, oh, it's too hard? Obviously, like the church phrases, doors are closing, God is closing doors, this is not meant to be. We didn't we didn't go there. So what was the difference? Because there have been points in my life when I get a sense that this is not for me. It's not like I bulldoze. We don't bulldoze everything in our life. There has been plenty of instances where we're like, this doesn't feel right anymore. It's time to step away. It's time to back out. But we didn't with this. Why?
for me, I think a lot of times it comes back to, are you willing to take action? So if we go back to the very beginning, when we as a board had our first meeting with the school district and said, hey, we would like you guys to authorize us, we would like to start a charter school here, and they ultimately told us no, we could have said, okay, we took action, we stepped out in faith, we said, yep, okay, we'd like to do this, and the door closed. But I don't quit there. And so we went one step further. We said, okay, well, that door's not open, or that door's not open. It's been closed, but there's this door that's open over here going the state route.
And it's like, yeah, I feel like most people just look at the one door in front of them and then it closes and they're like, yeah, okay. But you have to literally tunnel up, climb over.
You got to look around.
You got to take out some bricks sometimes. You got to bust a window up. Like you have to be like, the amount of creativity that is involved, I think, in the perseverance.
And sometimes it can feel like a dark place.
It was real dark.
And literally, you could be in this dark place with a flashlight, and some people just freeze. And they go run over to the corner and they hide and they turn their light off and they just, they sit there and suck their thumb. Where I was like, no, okay, we're in this dark corner. We turn the flashlight on. We're starting to look around for other doors. Well, great. We found this door over here at the state route. So we went that way, and then we got approved. And then there was like 50 more doors after that we like, oh, this door's closed. But here's the thing. And I think this goes back to what Joe was just asking, why do you keep going? It's because when you have the opportunity to look back at your track record and you can see how all of these other doors, all of these other paths were provided. They may not have been our first choice. And oftentimes they weren't our first choice, but it's like, so what? How can I quit at that particular time? Like you say, sure, there are times in life where you're like, hey, this is just not for me. I think you get a gut feeling on that. I think your intuition knows, hey, this is probably not the path you need to be going down. But I think also a track record of, hey, I've tried every door in here. Maybe this isn't for me. But for us, our intuition was, we're here for a reason. We know we're doing this for a reason. I can just feel it in my bones. Not only that, I could always look back. I can never look forward. We don't have a crystal ball. You don't have a crystal ball. But I can always look back and see how all those dots, how all those paths had been connected. So that builds my faith up. That builds my trust up in this process of, okay, well, I'm obviously on the right path. If I've come this far, if I've gone over this many mountains, why would I quit now?
And I think the question I always would ask myself, because like there were dark times, like there were times when all of us, our friends, the board would look at each other, like we cried a lot, like we were depressed a lot, like we would get a little win and then we just get like punched in the face by the district again, over and over and over. And I would always go back, okay, so if I quit now, how would that feel? And every single time, I never felt relief at the thought of quitting. I felt like total defeat, like I gave up too early. Now, again, there have been times in my life where I think of letting something go and I just play with that idea and I feel immediate relief. So I'm like, that's different, right? But this time I'm like, I knew what I believed to be true when we started the process. And I knew if we quit when it got hard, we were letting what I saw as corruption and dishonesty win. Like I don't want to say bad guy because that feels a little whatever, but we were letting something win that shouldn't win. Like we were, and we also, the other part where we had people in the community, like I was like, we have to be the champion for these people. They want this, they need this. They're not able with their resources or whatever to be able to do this on their own. They need someone to champion them. So I'm like, we can't quit. Like, and we literally took the approach, especially in those last few months, failure was not an option. Like when you have this do or die, all the ships are burned and you only can go forward, or it's literally like do or die, you get real creative. And I remember at one point, I think it was in the summer, right before school opened, the building did not look like it was going to happen. And the building, I don't believe would have happened unless the superintendent's Christian glossed over it, but they like magically switched out. Like, it was the weirdest thing where this superintendent who had been extremely challenging all of a sudden left, and we got this new superintendent, and we didn't know what he was going to be like, and he has been a gem, like an absolute joy to work with, polar opposite of the previous one, so oriented towards the kids and caring about the kids. If that hadn't switched when it did, which was out of our control, I don't think we would have had the building.
There were so many of these pieces that were out of our control. And that's why I say you've just got to be able to look back and go, hey, this happened and this happened and this happened and this, all these pieces just magically moved into place. You know, sure, we had to show up.
Well, we
had to do
action.
the work.
Like, because there's that idea of
it wasn't just we bury our head in the sand and then magically the school happens. No, we had to step out and do all of the work. But then it's like you have to do your part. And then once you've done your part, now you can be like, hey, okay, now here's room for God to step in and fix this, or, you know, pave the rest of the road for us, or show us which direction we need to go. So I think that's what it really was, because there was, I mean, we could probably make a list of 30 or 50 different things that were outside of our control. Like even our funding, for example, when our funding first got told to us, we thought we were barely going to make it work. You know, with a high end of like $14,000 or $15,000 at the end of the day, which was after school started.
Don't tell that part yet. Don't tell that part yet.
Sorry, guys. You guys
giving it away. You got to work on your storytelling narrative arc.
I still have bigger things.
But I remember there was a point, it was like, I don't know, early in the summer where it looked like the building wasn't going to happen. And we literally sat at Dana's house and we had supper and we all sat around the table. I'll never forget the feeling. And we were like, okay, guys, we don't have a building. So now what are we going to do? Because like this will happen. Like failure is not an option. So we were like, we committed, like there's this other building in town. We were like, we're all going to buy it. We're going to use personal money. We're going to pool together. We're going to scrape together and we're going to buy this old building and make it into a school. And like, that was our plan. Like we were committed. Like that was going to happen. We were on that track because we were like, not doing this is not an option. And so I think stepping out with that extreme intent, yeah, that went a long way. And then we didn't have to do that because the pieces fell into place. But if they hadn't fallen into place, we had a contingency plan.
Right. And I think sometimes God likes to test us in that way and say, how serious are you? How motivated, how driven are you really to making this happen? And I think for us, that was a pivotal point where we kind of sat down as a group and said, listen, if this doesn't happen, we will not quit here. We will step out in another direction and more faith and say, hey, we'll use our personal money. We'll do whatever we need to do to buy this other building, remodel this other building in a matter of, at that particular point, would have been weeks to make this thing ready for school. You know, and in my mind, it's like, I could just see it. It's like, okay, God says, hey, you guys are serious about making this happen. And I can see the level of intensity that you're bringing to making sure this goes off and is a success. Because of that, cool. Now it's like within the next couple of days, boom, this other school, you know, the school came. Which
was funny because it had been such a slog. And then when it happened, it happened. And the new superintendent's like, here, you want to come get the keys? Here, I'll walk you through. I'll give you a tour.
He actually drove the keys to us.
Yeah, he drove the keys down to us. Like it was insane.
Yeah.
And so now it was late July by the time we got in the building, right? Or when did we have
it was August 1st when we got in the building.
Yeah, we were starting like August 23rd or something.
August 7th, our teachers got back.
So we had a week. Now the building is awesome and huge. And the other thing that was really cool is the superintendent like let us keep the desks and like a lot of the equipment. So we were like thinking
essentially a fully furnished.
It was a fully furnished school because we were told earlier that if we did get the building, they were going to strip it out. So we were like, okay, where do you buy desks? Where do you buy whiteboards? Like we were going to have to completely furnish it. We didn't have to do that. So we walk into this building. We had a week to get it ready, clean it, flip it, get the classrooms ready before the teachers showed up for teacher training. So we were like all hands on deck, rolling, still waiting. We still didn't know our funding numbers. So we're like, cool, we have a school building. Hopefully we can afford to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so when did the funding numbers came in?
The funding numbers didn't come in until the 15th of August.
Yeah.
So, you know, our teachers had already showed up by that particular time.
Yep.
Because
moved into town.
We had, 2 weeks of professional development essentially before school started, and for teachers to be able to set up their classrooms. A lot of times teachers have access to the school, months before school starts. They can go to the school in the summertime and work on their classrooms. Obviously that didn't work for us. So teachers really had to be crunch time and to doing our professional development. Some of these teachers had never taught in a project-based environment before, so we had project-based education, professional development, and they had to set up their brand new classrooms. These were, a couple of them had moved to the state to teach here, and so I mean the amount of work that we had to do was tremendous. So August 15th rolled around, and they sent us an email with what our funding numbers were going to be, and it came in about $4,000 higher than we had expected.
Higher than the high end.
Yeah,
like that was the most magical day of the whole process. Like we cried, and it was surreal, and it was like, that was amazing.
Right.
Yeah.
We had raised over $250,000 just from the community, from community members and businesses who wanted to see this building, wanted to see this thing be successful. So some of that, when I go back to were we being reckless? Yeah, maybe we were being reckless, but I knew I could operate this school within the first year. When I had built my proposed budget, I knew I could operate the school within the first year. I knew I could pay for my teachers within the first year, but I knew worst case scenario, it was going to take all of the funding we were going to get, plus it was going to take all of the startup money we had. And so at that particular time, I'm like, worst case scenario, we would only last a year if our funding numbers didn't come in where they needed to be. But I knew I could step out in faith and say, hey, regardless, I can pay my teachers for the first year. We can make this thing happen for the first year. It might kill us after that, and we'll be done. But I'll be able to honor the contracts and the commitments that we laid out there and hired everybody that we did, all of our staff.
Yeah.
But when our funding numbers came back at higher than we had expected, we said, okay, great. This now allows the school to function off of the funding that we got from the state, which is what I really wanted to see. That then said, okay, now you can take your startup money, this $250,000 that we had raised, and then we ended up getting some grants to be able to use that for buying any additional classroom equipment or, things that we needed to have for the school to get up and running and create kind of a little bit of a buffer. And so it just, all the pieces worked out where literally days before that, I'm going, I don't know how this is going to work. Again, I was laying awake at night at 2:00 in the morning going, I don't know how this is going to work, but I had also structured it. And I was also smart enough to say, well, I know I can get through our first year. I know I can honor the commitments that we've made once we had our building. Yeah. So then the cool thing about the way the state authorized, because this was a school district owned building, one of the things that was in the charter school law is that the school district couldn't charge us rent, because here again, we're a publicly funded entity being a charter school, and the district is a publicly funded entity being a school district. So it wouldn't make sense for the government to say, okay, we're going to give you money as a charter school, and then you're going to turn around and give some of that money back to the district as in another publicly funded entity. And so they basically said, listen, you can't charge, because this is a publicly funded taxpayer owned building, you can't charge them rent. We did come up with an agreement because it was essentially a fully furnished building that we said, okay, we'll rent the building for you to whatever it costs the district to maintain. And we agreed, hey, we'll pay all the utilities, we'll pay all the trash and water and sewer, plus we'll pay for your insurance. We want to make this to where it's fair for the district that says, the district is allowing us to use this facility, but they're not doing so, that hurts the district. We were covering all of our expenses in the process.
And I think that's important too, because that was another point of contention. I mean, man, the gossip mill flew with this. And I think we accidentally created some enemies I didn't want to create. Not because, I think we were trying to keep it friendly, but it's hard in small towns. Because we have our little town where the school is, and then there's a neighboring town that's larger. And just hearing some of the stuff people were saying about us, like they're trying to hurt the district, they're trying to take us down, they're trying to hurt our children in this other town. I'm like, whoa, you guys, like, that is not our intent. Like, no, we didn't want handouts from the district. Like, we had always gone to the district and said, how can we have a mutually beneficial relationship? The district has struggled financially. That's a well-known fact. How can we help you with that? How can we become more self-sufficient down here in Chugwater? So, we're not a drain on your resources. And they just repeatedly under the old administration was like, no, they're just like refusing to think outside the box. And so it was frustrating, because I feel like until I was blue in the face, I said over and over publicly, one-on-one in groups, we're not trying to hurt you guys. We're not trying to hurt your kids. We're not trying to hurt any of you. We just need to create something different because this isn't working.
Right. And a lot of it comes down to the people just didn't know what a charter school was, and they didn't know how it was funded. There was a lot of misinformation. There was a tremendous amount of, once a rumor mill gets running, man, that thing takes off like gas and it just goes. And so but that was never our intention. We always had a really, I think, more than pure intentions from the beginning of saying, how do we help the district? How do we help Chugwater? How do we help the community here? How do we make sure that, we have equitable education going on in both towns? But
that was the key, equitable education, because that
yeah,
we were of the persuasion, us and the board, that was not happening in our community. And that's like, oh, that's all we want, guys. We just want it to be equitable.
We want these kids down here in this small town to still have the same opportunities and still receive the same good education that anybody else has the opportunity to get.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to oversimplify it. Districts and budgets and school district money is very complicated, and there is a lot that goes into it. And so, to a certain degree, when we say that the district was struggling financially, I'm not insinuating that the district was mismanaging their money. It's that when you don't have enough kids in the district and your overhead exceeds what your income is, then you're going to struggle financially. And that's where we were. I think Chugwater at that particular time was bringing in about what they told us is they were bringing in about $800,000 based off of the number of kids that were in that school. And it was costing them $1.2 million to operate it as a K-12 school. Well, that's a very challenging thing to overcome. And the main reason that expense was the way it was because of the number of kids that went there. So we're looking at it the same thing. We're going, how do we build a successful charter school? How do we create a economically viable place in Chugwater as a community where people want to come to the community? Because regardless of whether you got good education there, if people don't want to live in town or move to your community, they're not going to want to put their kids in school. So you got to have an economically sound town, and you got to have an economically sound school. So there's so many pieces of this puzzle that go together. It's complicated. It's very complicated. So and maybe some of it was us being naive in the beginning, going, oh yeah, we'll just go start a charter school. It'll be easy, and not knowing here's some of the bigger pictures, or some of the things that I'm looking at now long-term going, great. We've just made it through our first semester within the school, and it was a massive success. Our teachers and our staff and our administration are the best that we could possibly ask for. But I'm looking 5 years down the road going, if this school is going to be what we want it to be, what we said we were going to create in our initial application and this big vision, it's going to take more kids. And how do we get more kids in that school? Well, the school's got to grow and it's got to be great, but we've also got to make the town attractive. And how do we make the town attractive to get more people to want to come here? So it's just, there's so many moving parts and so many pieces to this that it's just was way more than we thought we were going to sign on.
I'm kind of glad, and we've all said this, the board included, we're glad we didn't know how hard it was going to be, because if we did, we probably wouldn't have done it. And I'm glad we did it. It was the hardest thing we've ever done.
Yeah.
Hands down, but
and it's not over.
It's not over, but we learned a lot. Every project I look at is like, how is it going to grow me as a person? Like, I'm not interested in it if it's just the same old, same old. Like, I want to see how it's going to grow us and stretch us. And who would have thought 5 years ago we'd know this much about funding schools and budgets and all the operation. And
but the amount of growth that we have done personally and professionally and from a business standpoint, and all of the things that we have learned with this, there are things that I will carry forward with me for the rest of my life that, my long-term vision is still not to be the CEO of a charter school for the next 20 years.
And this is another question people have been because we're entrepreneurs and we speak pretty boldly about entrepreneurship. He is working at the school 5 days a week now in office. That is not our normal lifestyle. That's not our long-term lifestyle, but you have to have that massive focus on these projects for a while. So we have plans to where we're never going to pull out of the school. We're very much involved and we'll stay involved, but he's not at the office 5 days a week. That's not a long-term goal, but for right now, that's what's happening, and it's a season. So
it's a startup. Is really what it is. It's like starting a brand new business. And so, we're in that phase of it right now of how do we make sure this thing stays successful and continues to grow. And those are the things that I'm focusing on. But ultimately, that's not where I'm going to be at for the rest of my life. But when I look at it and go, sometimes I look at this and go, why am I doing this? How did I find myself here? What's the point behind all this? What's the bigger picture here? What piece of the process am I struggling to trust because I'm right here where I am? But the amount of growth and the amount of things that I've learned over the last year and a half, 2 years is it's exponential. And so again, it's just another one of those things that I can look back and go, okay, I can see how this is connecting the dots. So when I look forward 5 years or in 10 years and I look back at that point, it's going to be the same thing. Oh yeah, well, we remember when we started this charter school, we did this, we learned that, how to do this. It's the same thing. So you yourself, if you find yourself going through something and you're like, man, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, I want to quit. I want to back out of this. Because I think there's times we've all asked ourselves that question of how do we get out of this? Man, we need to create an exit strategy here. We need to do something. This is not what we envisioned. But we know we can't do that. It's just we're going to plow forward. It's you just got to find that. You got to dig a little bit deeper and go, okay, what's the bigger picture here? If I'm down in the weeds right now and I'm looking at it, from ground level and I can't see 5 feet in front of me, sometimes you got to zoom out to that 10,000 foot level or that 30,000 foot level and go, okay, in the big picture of things, where am I at and what is this process? And realize that you're still moving forward.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, like life is short. And what is life if we're not investing in challenges for ourselves? Like what are we, I mean, I feel like our culture, and you guys hear me say this on the show all the time, like we're so obsessed with convenience and ease and like, okay, cool. You get to watch, let's say you get to watch Netflix in a perfectly climate controlled room for the rest of your life. Is that what you really want? Like, no, you're going to be miserable. So like create some meaningful challenge in your life. Maybe it won't be starting a charter school, but like people have been like, why are you doing this? Come on, this is going to make your life harder. And we're like, yeah, but what else? I mean, what else are we going to do?
Yeah, but who says that you're supposed to have an easy life?
And who says hard is bad?
I mean, people say that to us all the time, or say that to me all the time. Well, why are you doing that? This is hard. Well, so what?
Yeah.
Like, who says it's supposed to be easy? Like, at what point do we wake up in life and go, here's your easy button. You just get to hit it every day for the rest of your life. That's not the life I want. I mean, literally, I want my every day to be filled with challenges. That's when I'm my happiest, when I'm buried in how am I going to get through this? Because that's where you're experiencing growth. You're not going to experience growth if your life is you're just going through life hitting the easy button every day.
And that, I'll never forget the day the school opened. It was, we had just got our funding numbers. We're just in the new building. We had everyone show up. The little community, the elderly folks of the community came, and a bunch of others, and lined, it was their idea. They coordinated, they lined the walkway into the school building and cheered for the kids coming in. And it was the most surreal moment. And like all the dopamine, all the oxytocin, all the happy chemicals. And I'm like, it was just like mountaintop. And you don't get to have those mountaintops unless you've been through some valleys. Like you don't get that feeling from watching a Netflix movie. Like you don't get that good stuff unless you've gone through the challenges. And I'm like, it was in that moment, like the challenges aren't over, but we all looked at each other and we were all crying. And I'm like, that was worth it. That was the hardest thing. That was insane. That was dark, but that was worth it. And I'm like, that's what life is, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's next with the charter school? We still have some stuff to figure out.
Transportation is another big one. And this is just because partially that it's never been done. So, even though we're a charter school, we're kind of being treated and thought of as like a brand new district. We're not a new district. We're operating within a district. So they're not reestablishing district lines, but the state's never had to create a brand new fleet for a brand new school in a district like this in probably 50 years. And so they're kind of sitting back, scratching their heads going, yeah, we'll do this and we'll figure this out and we'll help you along the way. But we don't really know what that looks like. We haven't had to do this. And so it's just taken a lot of, things move so slow. I mean, everybody hears this, you go work in the government or you do anything with the government, like everything takes so slow. And like, we've experienced this so much firsthand. It's like, this shouldn't be, especially coming from the business sector.
Yeah.
Where you're not tied to the government, like you can pivot and move like in fractions of a second. Like you can make things happen so fast. And a lot of times when you do that, it makes you more successful. It's your willingness to pivot so fast and to take action that sets you above everybody else. And yet here, when you've got this, kind of ball and chain on you, you can't pivot and it takes so slow. And so that's probably been one of the most frustrating things that I've had to learn. How do I deal with this? Because nothing moves at the speed that I want it to move at. But transportation right now is our number one thing. And that's just kind of another plug for this school. Is you look at this school in a rural community like this, where we've got, I think 58, 59 kids in the school right now. Over 3/4 of those kids don't live within the city limits of the town. And yet every one of those families is bringing their kids to this school because we don't have buses. That's how much this community was behind the school from the beginning and saying, cool, we'll work with you. We want you to get the transportation figured out, but in the meantime, we'll bring our kids to the school. So we've got to get the transportation piece figured out. And hopefully we'll have that up and running within this next semester and have it fully operational by the beginning of next school year.
Yeah. I think the other big thing is like we're project based, which means we want kids. I've had so many childhood education experts here on the show, and we've talked about how the traditional learning environment doesn't always foster learning and it can kill curiosity. And so the goal with this school is to break out of that paradigm and get kids doing real world things, trades, working with their hands, but still focusing on academics. We're still an academic school. But I think we want to continue. We just had a meeting with some of the board members the other day. Like, how can we get so out of the box with this? How can we get so creative? Like right now, we did some cool stuff this last semester, but we also were just trying to like keep our head above water because I don't know, we're starting a school and operating it for the first semester. But like, okay, how can we create these different projects and really tap into what each kid, what lights them up? So we have a lot of ideas. We're still implementing a lot of that. I'm excited to see where that goes and how creative we can be with that.
Yeah.
So
not being afraid to ask questions and, look at how things are being done or how things have been done in the past and go, why are we doing it this way? What if we changed it? What if we flipped this entire model on its head and we completely revamped, how things are being done and how things are being taught and how classrooms are set up and how you're spending your time and where you're getting your deep work done and where you're getting your deep focus done. And, it's those kinds of thinkings that's going to allow us to move into the future and be even more successful than we are now.
And wow, like when you want to hit up against some resistance and people saying, we do this because it's always been done this way, go to the world of education.
Go to the education.
Like that triggers me more than anything. If you want to see me get red hot, angry, just tell me I have to do something because it's how we've always done it. Yeah. So like, it's really hard. And I know there's some awesome teachers out there. I'm not dogging on y'all. Like there's a whole bunch of out of the box teachers, but I know the system prevents a lot of that. Go back and listen to the episode with Matt Bodrow. He had an amazing, he spoke to that in an amazing way. But like the system is very much set in stone. And so getting just our brains and getting everyone's brain to just be willing to think outside of that is challenging. But I think there's a lot of awesome things on the other side of that.
Yep.
So that was the story of the charter school. People keep asking us what's next. I don't know. I think we're going to try to just keep doing the charter school for a while and not start another big, giant, crazy project.
Yeah.
What do you think?
We
need to breathe a little bit after this.
I mean, this has been quite the mountain, and we've had a lot of peaks that we've experienced and a lot of highs and a lot of lows. But in the grand scheme of things, we're 6 months into, the first year of a 5-year contract that we have with the state. And so, I think the big statistic that's out there is most charter schools fail within the first 2 to 3 years. And so, obviously we're trying to do everything that we can that makes sure our charter school is successful beyond that. And, if we're successful through that 5-year point, then I'm 100% confident that we'll get another 5-year contract. And so it's just, how do we lay the foundation? That's really where we're at right now is we're still laying the foundation brick by brick of what this charter school is going to be and how it's going to be long-term and set that vision. And so that's really, that is it. That is the project. Starting the charter school was grand and big and fun. And now it's, well, great. You have a charter school. How are you going to ensure its long-term success? That in and of itself is a whole nother piece.
And so I've had a ton of people message me since I started hinting at this process online. And so now maybe you can see why I didn't know how to talk about it more publicly on my platforms, because sometimes I would be excited and wanting to share. And then like literally 24 hours later, we'd get bad news from the district and I'd be in the depths. And so I'm like, I didn't know how to share it online. Also, I had to be really careful what I said publicly because we didn't want to make enemies because we already had enough of those as it stood. But when people were messaging me and going, cool, I don't like my school district. How do I start a charter school? Like, I'm like, I don't know. I still don't know how to start a charter school. I have no idea. I think anyone listening to this who's feeling like you have a need in your community for this, I'm not going to discourage you from doing it. Listen to your gut, but know that it is extremely complicated, and your story and your path will probably be very different from ours because it's so unique to your state, your district, your community. Like there's just a lot of different loopholes and
Right.
rules and all the education convoluted stuff. So I don't feel like we're going to be a lot of help to folks at this juncture of helping them start something.
Well, I think the biggest thing that we can give you is, you've got to have that determination. You've got to have that fire within you and that drive within you that just says, this is what we're going to do. And this is what we were called to do. And we're going to make it happen no matter what. And that is kind of the challenge here, is that at least in Wyoming, there are several states where charter school, there is a very clear road map to building charter schools.
It's easier other places.
Yeah. Colorado is a great place for an example. There's a lot of charter schools that are very successful down there, and a lot of organizations that they've kind of got all the pieces of the puzzle figured out on, okay, if you want to charter charter school, then here's how you do it. Our biggest challenge in Wyoming was that, at least from a state authorized route, it had never been done. And so we're still plowing that path forward. And right now the legislation has capped. There's only 3 charter schools that are allowed from a state standpoint until I think 2028. And then they start kind of sprinkling more out there again for people to apply and to build more charter schools. And realistically, by 2028, I mean, this will be a well-worn path. We'll know, the WDE will know, the state. Yeah. Hopefully by then they'll got their legislation and all the laws figured out, and everybody will be happy with where they are. They're not doctoring them up every single year. So, if this is something you want to do, and even if it's not a charter school, if you're up against some other big project in your life, it's the same thing. I would encourage anybody that's with the same piece of advice of, man, you just got to double down and you just got to go.
Yeah. And don't expect to see the steps. Expect to maybe see half the step you're standing on right now.
Yeah.
Do not wait to see, like we so many times leapt off the step into the next step. We didn't know where it was. We just landed somehow. But like you cannot, I see so many people in business and homesteading and all sorts of things are waiting to have every little step mapped out. Especially now it's January, beginning of the year, people are planning out all these goals. And I used to plan out like 12 months, 24 months at a time. And now I'm like, I still cast some vision, but I'm like, I know how life goes now. Yeah. I know where I'm at now and I know where I intend to go, but I expect the path to be very different. So don't get hung up on having the steps ahead of you. Sometimes if you know in your gut, you're supposed to do it. You just got to leap.
And sometimes in life, you can hire a coach. That's the whole point of a coach, is the coach can see the steps that you can't see. They've been down that path. They know what this looks like, and we had hired some consultants. We worked with several consultants when we were starting this process, especially during the application process, but they didn't know Wyoming. They knew Colorado. They knew other states. They didn't know Wyoming because it hadn't been done in Wyoming before. So it's the same thing. If you can hire somebody in your world to help you move the needle forward faster, then I would recommend doing that, because it's always going to pay off in the long run. But that doesn't mean that if that roadmap isn't built yet, well, then you can be a pioneer.
You get to build it.
Yeah, you get to do it. And then, we've said the same thing on our board. We're like, the reality is, the truth of the matter is in 5 years, we will be those coaches. We will be the ones that are turning around and saying, now we know how this is done. We built this road, and now we can be your consultant if you want to build a charter school in Wyoming, maybe other states, but we'll know how this process works and we'll be intimate with this process. So, when we have that knowledge, then absolutely we would be like,
we'll make a course.
We'll make a course. Yeah. We'll
be $1 million.
We'll be, here's how you're going to do this, and here's what it's going to look like. But right now we're still out there with picks and axes and build the world.
We have no idea. So anyway.
Cool.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
Sounds good. So hopefully, I don't expect this will not become a charter school podcast, but I hope this episode was interesting and also just gave you some food for thought on your own challenges and struggles in life. And I hope that 2024 is a year of interesting challenges for you. I hope it actually isn't completely smooth sailing. I hope you have an opportunity to get tested and find your resilience and get some of those mountaintop moments. So anyway, if you have questions about the charter school, I can answer some. I'm not great at answering all of them. So, if you want to tag me on Instagram with any thoughts or whatever, that's fine. But I'm also not a walking charter school encyclopedia. Or come find him. He knows way more than I do about it. I just have been the cheerleader mostly on the sidelines and feed people food when they were in our office till 1 a.m.
You did a great job with that.
Yeah. So anyway, all right, guys, that is a long episode for today, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time on the Old Fashioned on Purpose podcast.